All right, let's get right into it. We're going to jump back 2,000 years to unpack one single powerful idea that has kind of quietly shaped, well, almost everything in Western civilization. We're talking cathedrals, universities, even how we think about time itself. This is the story of a question that just wouldn't go away, and this is that question. I mean, what do you do when the apocalypse you're expecting just doesn't show up? For us, that sounds like the plot of a movie, right? But for the very first Christians, this wasn't some hypothetical thought experiment. It was a real, pressing, and frankly, terrifying crisis of faith. You have to put yourself in their shoes. For the early church, living under the thumb of the Roman Empire, facing persecution daily, the promise that Christ was coming back soon wasn't just some nice doctrine, it was their lifeline. It was the very air they breathed. If justice wasn't going to break into history, then all their suffering, all the martyrs, it was all for nothing. But then, the strangest thing happened. Nothing. The world just kept spinning. And that delay, that moment when history refused to end, well, that's where our story really kicks off. Just think about what a massive shift this was. The apostles, they used words like soon, at hand. That hope is what gave people the courage to face lions in the Colosseum. But then, decades passed. A whole generation was born and died, and then another. The Roman Empire was still there, but so was the church. It didn't just survive, it started to grow. And that unexpected survival forced them to ask a much, much harder question. And there it is. That's the pivot. The whole question changed from when are we getting out of here to okay, how are we supposed to live faithfully in this world right now? This wasn't a weakening of their faith, it was a deepening of it. They started to wonder if history wasn't just a waiting room for the main event, but the main event itself, the stage for Christ's kingdom. Now, a question that big needed a giant of a thinker to answer it, and he showed up. Enter the Bishop of Hippo, Augustine. He's writing while an empire is literally crumbling around him, and he comes up with a framework that would stabilize Christian thought for 1,000 years. Can you just imagine the scene? AD 410, the eternal city of Rome gets sacked. It's absolute chaos. Pagans are pointing fingers, yelling, "See? This is what happens when you abandon the old gods." And even the Christians were shaken to their core. They're asking, wait, if Christ is reigning, why does the world look like it's ending? Augustine's masterpiece, The City of God, wasn't some dusty academic book. It was an emergency response to a world on fire. So Augustine just completely reframes the whole picture. He says, look, all of human history is the story of two cities, and they're not defined by walls or empires, but by what they love. You have this city of man, which is defined by love of self, of power, of glory, and you have the city of God, defined by its love for God. And right now, he said, they're all mixed up together. You can't separate them, but their final destinations are completely different. And what that meant was revolutionary. The fall of Rome was not the fall of the kingdom of God. Then Augustine takes this idea and applies it to what is maybe the most confusing chapter in the whole Bible, Revelation 20. He argues, first, that binding of Satan already happened when Christ came the first time. It broke his power to blind all the nations to the gospel. Second, that 1,000 years, the millennium, is not a literal future date on a calendar, it's a symbolic number for the entire age of the church, the time we're in right now. Which leads to step 3, the big one. Christ isn't waiting to become king, he is reigning right now. And this quote just says it all. For Augustine, the church wasn't just sitting around waiting for the kingdom to show up, the church is the kingdom. It's the visible, on-the-ground, real-world embassy of heaven on earth. And that idea, well, that changed absolutely everything. It shifted the entire posture of the church from passive waiting to active engagement. And that shift wasn't just theoretical, it had massive, world-altering consequences. This long kingdom theology didn't just change how people thought, it literally built a civilization. Think about it. Augustine's view was the dominant one in the West for over 1,000 years, and not because some emperor forced it on people, but because it gave them a purpose. It gave Christians a reason to think generationally, to build for the future. If Christ is already king, then our work right here, right now, in history, actually matters. The church basically stopped looking for the fire escape and started renovating the building. And you can literally see the results carved into history. The great universities of Europe, the first hospitals, core concepts in Western law like moral accountability, all of it grew from this deep conviction that Christ is reigning now and that our job is to do long-term faithful work in His world. Let's be real, you don't spend centuries building a university if you think history is just a waiting room before the real show starts. This way of thinking was so foundational that 1,000 years later, even the Protestant Reformers were operating inside of it. They weren't trying to come up with some new end times chart. They were trying to reform the church and build better societies because they saw themselves as stewards of a kingdom that was already here, already active. But then, after more than a millennium, this rock-solid, dominant view was about to get a radical challenge. In the 19th century, a brand new system of thinking popped up, one that basically turned Augustine's entire framework completely upside down. So the 19th century was just a period of massive, chaotic change. You had revolutions, the grime and confusion of the Industrial Revolution, the rise of a really aggressive secularism. For a lot of people, it really felt like Christianity was losing ground, not gaining it. That confident, long kingdom vision started to feel, well, a little out of touch with a world that seemed to be spiraling out of control. I mean, just look at this timeline. The gap is staggering. For almost 1,500 years, the main idea was about endurance, about building something that lasts. But then, all of a sudden, in the 1830s, this guy named John Nelson Darby comes along and introduces a totally new idea, that the goal of the church isn't to endure in history, but to escape from it. And the contrast between the two is just night and day. In the historic long kingdom view, Christ's reign is a present reality, history is the arena of victory, but in Darby's new system, Christ's reign is basically postponed. The church is just a parenthesis, a temporary blip in God's real plan, and history, well, it's just the prelude to an evacuation. It's two completely different ways of seeing everything. Now, what's so crucial to understand here is that this new system, which became incredibly popular, wasn't someone rediscovering a lost ancient truth. It was a modern invention. It was a theological architecture built to make sense of loss, of cultural pessimism. It was designed to explain what looked like failure, not to steward a victory. Okay, so that's a quick trip through 2,000 years of history, but this isn't just a history lesson. This old debate has a direct line to how we think, how we vote, how we work, and what we believe the whole point of our lives is, right now, today. The real divide here isn't really about being an optimist versus a pessimist, it's about your whole approach. The older long kingdom view is based on expectation. It asks, okay, how do we live faithfully for our king right now? And that leads to building things to endurance. The newer system is an architecture. It asks a different question. Where are we on the prophetic chart? And that tends to lead to speculation, to calculation, and to planning your exit. And that's really the heart of it all. This entire 2,000-year-old conversation, it all boils down to one fundamental question. What is history for? Is it the stage where Christ's victory is slowly but surely unfolding? Or is it just a sinking ship that we need to get off of as fast as possible? Because at the end of the day, pretty much all Christians agree that Christ will return. That's not the debate. The much more immediate question, the one that actually shapes how you live your life Monday through Saturday, is this one. Is he king now? Is his authority a present, active reality? Or is it something that's still on back order? Because your answer to that question changes everything. It determines if you see your job, your family, your neighborhood, your culture as a field that you're supposed to cultivate for a king who is reigning right now, or if you see it all as just a big mistake that you have to grit your teeth and survive until the evacuation plan kicks in. That is the 2,000-year-old question we are all, one way or another, still answering today.